All right. Hello, everyone. Good to know that the book has come out in Europe. Thank you. So yes, the book. If you're on Twitter, you've seen the sort of press attention that it's been receiving, and I think when it is released in the United States, I think there will be an equal amount of attention lavished on the book, and I hope that it starts to spur the kind of conversation that the book is intended to spur. And in fact, that's sort of what we're doing here, because the book, of course, is huge, but it starts by calling for a new kind of history that goes beyond a lot of the conventional wisdoms that people have come to think and have gotten stuck in their thinking. And so the book is meant to move us in a direction that can begin a conversation that hasn't been happening, because people have been discussing a lot of these ideas about how to make a better world from either a Hobbesian position, where they tend to believe that, you know, we are by nature in a war of all against all, or the more revolutionary and radical tradition traces to Rousseau, that makes a similar kind of theological argument that we once were inhabitants of a pristine garden where we were equals, but that the complexities of society and the size of populations are such that that's just no longer realistic. And so one of the first things that the two Davids try to do at the start of the book is to show how prevalent that kind of epistemological assumption is, that both arguments, Hobbes and Rousseau, are based on an absence of evidence. And there's been a lot of work that David Wengrow and other archaeologists have done since then to illustrate the diversity of social arrangements in the so-called pre-modern era. And one of the things that I love about the third chapter in particular is it follows the second chapter, which is the refutation of the Hobbesian and Rousseauian kind of thinking that has biased debates into starting from a flawed assumption that that humans ought to strive to return to some sort of paradise, rather than starting with the assumption that inequalities are going to be inevitable among humans, just as is difference. When do those sorts of differences become reproduced socially? And how do they get reproduced? And then if they do become systematic and buttressed by structures of violence, how does that then happen historically? So chapter 3 is, in a way, the first real chapter where they start to lay the foundation of their argument about the human past. They only get to the beginnings of that argument after the first two chapters that sketch out just how Hobbesian and Rousseauian scholarship has been. So this third chapter is all about unfreezing the ice age and trying to get at if inequalities have always existed, how have certain kinds of inequalities become structured over time? And their argument is goes against conventional wisdom that in the more recent years has been debunked. So they're not making a novel contribution in the sense that their argument about agriculture necessarily creating hierarchy. Jim Scott and others have written on this. But what I think is novel about this chapter is showing the importance of seasonal variation as a mechanism for variability to prevent social hierarchies from becoming transferred across generations. And so it's a real argument in favor of a basic understanding of humans, not only as social creatures, but seasonal creatures as well. And this to me is really kind of eye-opening because and I wish David Graeber were here to speak to this, because I'd ask him, so you're advocating sort of seasonal variation to social arrangements, and I'm just wondering what that would look like. And so I throw that out as really the kind of overarching question. What could, David Graeber was all about possibilities. And so what does this suggest for possibilities within the species to think of, how could we actually, what could that look like? Seasonal variation in patterns of social organization. I know that humans do that. We see it among the bourgeoisie with their homes in Florida for the winter and the homes in New England for the rest of the year, or those who what's it called, summer in the Hamptons. But that, of course, is the result of property arrangements, not the consequence of them necessarily. So I want to toss that out as a question that we can start with, or of course, if anyone has a different direction that they'd like to go, that's always potentially fruitful. So I welcome that.
May I?
Yes, Simona.
Hi. Nice to meet you, all of you. I'm very happy tonight. Well, I don't think we need to organize seasonal variation. I think there is a simple explanation for it about seasonality. There are still in present days societies that are nomadic in certain times and settlers in others. I think in Mongolia people live like this. You can be in cities for a period of your life and nomadic in another. I think it doesn't need to be made on purpose. I think it can just easily be a purposefully adaptation to seasonality of games and the conditions of life. To answer your question, what would be more interesting, but I think a bit difficult to prove is seasonality of social arrangements made on purpose. But I don't know, what do you think about it?
Michael, were you wanting to jump in? I just saw that you were off mute, so I wasn't sure.
I don't know why that happened. I'm actually making a peanut butter sandwich, trying to eat some food. Here, but sorry. So just on this comment of this issue, I mean, I obviously haven't read all of this really thoroughly, but I didn't take it so much that the idea that humans were seasonal and this was some kind of innate quality of humans, and this is where politics came from. I simply took it that seasons were a moment when you had difficult environments that people had to actually do things really differently. And when they had a different way of doing things, they might arrange themselves differently. Like if you have the one season that you're just basically living on whatever you've stored and you have to be in a kind of community houses, then, you know, you have a particular arrangement. And another season you're traveling because you want to capture, follow the bison or follow the deer or follow the thing, then you had a very different arrangement for that specific function. And in those different arrangements, different political different situations up, and the comparison between the situation that arose in this function and this made people politically savvy. And I would say, I mean, to take, say, an example that David would be very interested in is the camp that you make when you, like, for example, Occupy was this thing. A lot of people talked about stuff, but then suddenly you go do Occupy and you do it all the time. You're in a different social situation and you realize a whole different set of arrangements. And so I think we still have this. I would myself point to, like, not so much climate camp, because I've only been to one of those, but it's the same arrangement. Earth First does these camps. We have a political camp and people are organized in a neighborhood. They do their own cooking. And so all these people who might not care that much about anarchist politics in a way of talking about it, or collective politics in a, you know, that way that you get a group of people going on about the theories of anarchy. But they, you know, they're basically these people who are not paying too much attention to that kind of stuff. Or people who talk about anarchist politics, but they've only seen it, read about it in books. They get into those events and all of a sudden they experience really clearly, here's how society could work differently. And it's only for a short period of time, maybe a protest camp or something. And that comparison suddenly makes them instantly understand a huge amount of stuff because they're embedded in it. So it's the physicality of being in a situation where your social arrangements are very different that gives you a new imagination. You've experienced that. And I think humans always probably had that. And then the seasonality argument is that it was kind of obvious that they did have these different comparisons, or obvious enough that even from archaeological evidence 50,000 years later, some people like David Wengrow and David Graeber could kind of guess that there was these different situations. It would be pretty hard to find a comparison in other circumstances. If, you know, seasonality is one of the best arguments or the most obvious ways to discover that people might have different circumstances at different times that makes their political consciousness suddenly like, oh, wow, I used to do it all this way, but there's this other way to do it. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the whole point is about flexibility of human societies, possibilities. And do you remember the final chapter of the Utopia of Rules? where there is this argument about children playing in taking different roles and spending a lot of time arguing about rules for their games, transforming play into games. And I think what they are arguing there is that this is what people usually did in ancient times before getting stuck in one form of a society, of hierarchical society, like we are. Then I'll be quiet. Sorry for.
Hey, Nika.
Yeah, I love what Michael was saying about these camps. That really, because everything is about what to do now. Actually, I don't think rich people changing their seasonality, they don't change social arrangements in any case. When they move to Florida from their like New York houses, it's all the same. But yeah, this activist camps, they may be considered to be real life experience of social arrangement. And I think when the kids are moving from nuclear families to the universities, that's the big deal. That's everybody's taking bets to do that. My son is hope to go to the campus next year. But it's interesting that this arrangement is not socially liberating at all. It's actually even more conservative in training people, you know, to live in these hierarchical structures. So the main question is what happens if also because of this book, so many people will suddenly realize that Leviathan is just a scary fairy tale as well as a noble savage. Will we be able to create this new structure? So how would we be able to do that?
Maybe the starting point is being conscious that we are able to do that. And actually, I was thinking this afternoon of what made me study David's works. And I was looking for his ethnography of revolts, of revolutions. I think what he did all his life was also an ethnography of uprisings of people getting together and inventing new forms of collective action. So just to see how it worked. And I think it works. There are many ways we can do it. Not just it can happen. We can do it. And with problems and with the Zavora, the weight of our history and of our frames of thinking that get us going to barter, thinking that this is the only way we can have exchanges, for example. But we can imagine other ways. And one thing that I find fascinating in this chapter is that it reverts to festivals and carnival. And there are in our in a way in our ancestral memory remnants of these ancient festivals. Actually, this memory may be carnivals, and festival were a feature of medieval times. And I was thinking in these weeks of my grandma fundamental value of hospitality. My grandma was from Mediterranean, from southern Italy, and she believed in hospitality and in giving for free to the host, much more than she believed in Jesus. When you enter in my house, my religion obliged me to give you everything I can, because this is the law, the ancient law of hospitality that, in my opinion, is connected to this network of traveling, of hosting, of giving, of exchanging without money, without barter, without expecting something, because money and barter are for strangers, not for hosts, not for friends. These connections of friendship that were a character of ancient Mediterranean Sea are still in our ancestral culture, and I feel it very strong in my family tradition. So my whole point is these possibilities are already there. It's just an issue of seeing them and imagining them.
There is no moderator anymore for 15 minutes, so maybe I will be a moderator, and in this case I will propose people who are new here if they want to say something, because so we just give a voice to somebody who didn't talk yet. So do you want to say something, Isabel, Keiko?
Hi, my name is Isabel. I've just joined. I studied legal anthropology a few years ago at the LSE, and I never had really the opportunity to go back to it. So I'm really happy to be able to join and read the book together. I'm also just thinking about like the idea of festivals and carnivals, just going back to that, this also a way to sort of mock the people in power, sort of like with the notion of like the jester and other types of characters in these situations, in these scenarios. And that also is sort of like a fun way to sort of like poke at power, but also keep it in check in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Like actually now I'm in New York, and one of the things is most surprising for me in New York is a huge popularity of comedy clubs. So the stand-up comedy always was there, but now it's just insane. The people are gathering in laundromats, you know, in like barbershops. It's a huge scene, and it's very much remind me late Soviet Union, when you know, everybody was telling each other this anti-Soviet anecdotes. So from one side, government was controlling everybody, but from another side, it was such a big part of everyday life. You know, every new anecdote about Brezhnev was just like immediately spread by like millions of people. So yeah, I think this is very, it's never gone anywhere. This idea of festival and carnival and mocking power and inventing language that can kind of put it down. But I don't know how other people feel. I feel it's like really the world is going a different direction right now. country is concentrating power more and more civilians. China is rising, you know, like in Russia, it's like almost full-scale totalitarian regime, as well as, you know, everybody else is very similar. So it doesn't look like we will suddenly be able to create the small moving communities. You know, what people feel about that.
So I'll also say hello quickly. I'm Heiko. I'm new. I have absolutely no professional background in anything relating to the book, but I'm very excited to read it. Being in Europe, I've been happy to get a copy. So in this chapter about the Ice Age societies, what struck me really was the amazing social complexity that is described about the societies shifting back and forth. This feels to me like it's like an entirely different level of navigating what a society can do, something that I find like almost inconceivable, like how a group of dozens or hundreds of people might arrive at this point where they agree that this is what should be done. It's amazing to imagine, and it's very humbling for our society to think this is something we would be able to do if only we hadn't somehow failed to do it. So I find that a very interesting perspective to maybe lose a little bit of this European hubris of thinking we have figured out how to be civilized people. Yep.
I'm new as well. My name is Nikki. I'm from the Netherlands. I don't have an academic background, but I had the call from Occupy 10 years ago in The Hague, the Netherlands. And I am also new to this group. I was at the memorial recently. And then Mark invited me for this reading group. And my brain is really exploding with associations. So I'm just gonna listen and later share what comes to mind.
Hello, this is Ana from Spain. I am an academic, but in a very different field because I'm an engineer. So all this is very different from what I'm used to think about. When I was used to think about, I've been thinking about it for some time now. But from what you said about the chapter, it scares me a bit that maybe this different way of organizing society could be necessary to organize in different environments. So then wouldn't this confirm what is being said, that since we are a so complex society, we have to have this hierarchical society? I mean, this scares me a lot because I never thought it was this way, but from what you said, that is said in this chapter, couldn't we think that? I mean, when you have when you live in a certain season where you have, I don't know, some animals around, then you organize in a way, but then when you are in another season where you can have a different way, source of living, then you organize in another way that fits better the environment. I mean, that's really scary because that would mean that we are stuck here because really we are in a complex society, and that's what we can do. Doesn't this bother you?
Maybe I just come in briefly on that. It doesn't necessarily bother me because I think when you have how humans take up any particular technology will also have to do with like a cultural pattern. There's not a sense of a specific technology will be used in this way. And I should know this term. There's a term in sociology of technology about that, but it is, but there's a good deal of sociology that will look at that in different circumstances, people will use a technology. So in different ways. So you see the same technologies used in another location or culture or time, or even the same type of place, but they have the people using it have a different background. And there's also how people come to it. So I think the seasonal variation argument is not to say that the people were determined by their environment, which would be a very old argument and very much disagreed with in the social sciences, although geographers have been making it quite in the past, and debating it always. But it's more that it requires, a different season requires with a very specific goal, like let's hunt these deer, will require some type of plan, and that plan has to adapt to the environment. The deer move here, the trees are here, the sunlight per day is this amount, and within that you can construct a social relationship to your environment, and with what tools you have that could be one particular pattern, and as you learn it, you'll tend to do it again. So in the same way that if you're building a bridge over a valley as an engineer, you could build that bridge in many different ways. It's not that the valley determines what the bridge is. It may also do with what you want the bridge to do, what materials you have, all kinds of things. So I don't think it's determined. It's just that it's different in that sense. I don't know if that helps think about it a bit more.
Yeah, thank you. I was not thinking so much about the technology, but about the structure. I mean, the complexity of the society we live in. I mean, is it possible to do things as complex as we do in another organization, like without hierarchies? Or is it that if you have such complex tasks, then you need to have such a structure? And that's why they organize that way, depending on the season.
That's exactly the argument of the book, that there was a lot of now evidence of very complex behavior, like people were constructing. I don't know if you read this chapter 3, but it's describing an amazing architectural achievements and people storing food, preserved food for hundreds of people. So doing obviously a public work, a very complex arrangement of public work, and still these societies are not stuck in hierarchy. So all the book is over and over again in arguments that no, this is not true, that if we want to live in civilization or in a complex structure, so if we want to go to space, we have to live in miserable patriarchal hierarchical societies. So that's the whole point of this book. And I think it's quite, I think it's a good reason to think that it's will be convincing for many people, because so many books already come that describe it. There was a lot of preparation for years and years. So hopefully this book is a last stone, last, how we call it in English, last nail in the coffin of this this image of the unavoidability of our misery.
Okay, I'm sorry because I was not able to read the chapter because I don't have the books yet. But hopefully I will receive it soon and be able to read it before we meet again.
And in terms of hierarchy and complexity of our society today, you can make some certain arguments like that the hierarchy is actually failing to deal with a huge number of problems that are coming up. The most notable one being civilization looking on the edge of a climate change catastrophe. So, and the kind of hierarchical processes continue to like slow and disable our ability to adapt or to prepare for that or to prevent against it.
It's very interesting what you're saying, Mike, because I'm just today read this article about China that is very horrifying. You know, China is evolving quickly, becoming like the major world power and also totalitarian state. In the same time, our Fight Club, if you saw it or if anybody saw it, between Michael Hudson and Thomas Piketty, Michael Hudson mentioned that China is in a much better position to cancel the debts because they're all money owned by the government. So in this case, hierarchical structure in China is putting them in a better position to fight climate change because they can, for example, forbid certain type of production if it's publicly not useful, but harmful for the climate change. Or they can do like bigger rearrangement. And I remember that from Soviet Union as well, like we all were recycling, we were washing the plastic bags. And every apartment you will come in and you will see the plastic bag drying.
We lost you, Nika.
Did anybody who's fully read the whole article want to talk about the little bit about the importance of eccentricity? Because I've kind of got to that bit, but I haven't read it. But I had seen some of other David Graeber's and Wengrow's other stuff that were previous to this book that talked about the unusualness of certain archaeological finds were all like, you know, just these supposed hierarchies were disproportionately like dwarves or very bizarre people who might have been. Did they talk about that or propose any kind of real theory?
Oh yes, they use they say most of the burials of the magnificent burials we find of the antiquity are of the skeletons are of unusual people or very tall or dwarfs or with congenital malformations. And in some cases, the burial can be, and what's strange is also that usually people were not buried at that time. They were made into pieces. Even bones were used for jewelry. There were. It was unusual to bury a body, a corpse, and even more unusual to bury it dressed. So it doesn't look like, and in some cases it's children. These children burials were interpreted as they were the sons of some important king, but it is very strange. It doesn't look like a good explanation because of the fact that burials are of children or dwarfs or strange people, and not of. There are no other signs of hierarchy in contemporary society. So, as in anthropological findings, we see that in many societies, the figure of the prophet, or there are strange fool people that are accepted or even mocked in regular times, but become the ones are like a reservoir of wisdom, of wit in crisis occasions. So they are the people to whom other people resort when there is a crisis, when you need new ideas and you need to act in a different way in rapport to former and quieter times. So evidences from archaeology could point to a situation where the ones that are buried in this magnificent form weren't kings or princes or the offsprings of a royal dynasty, but there's figures on the limit of sacred, in a way, that were scaring and such as to look at them for prophecy, for new ideas that they could have been people on the border of society, or both prophets and a threat to society. And this could explain why they were buried and why they were so honored, because you honor also the one that scares you. So this is what I said. If I may take the opportunity, in this chapter, we also have I don't know how many are there tonight that were in the reading group about beyond the monastic self, but the same argument is in this chapter. It's about people collective, about conversation and dialogue as the only way we have to really think. Our conscience lasts 7 seconds when we are alone, thinking alone in a room, and it can last for hours, say the two Davids. When we are in a conversation, we are debating. So our skills for social imagination are not an individual skill. They are a collective skill developed in conversation and negotiation. And I love this idea.
Can I just add something? I think that also the respect for the eccentrics at the edges of society and turning to them during crisis is exactly preserving that flexibility that you mentioned earlier, Simona. And we're running into this right now, where instead of turning to such people to solve problems, we're digging in our heels, you know. And so it's precisely this. Maybe a cynic would say it's like throwing the dice. I don't believe that. I believe that it's turning to those parts that are not listened to as often as they might be. But it's if we don't do that, we're going to become rigid. And I think that's even a bigger danger than losing political systems in general.
Maybe I can take what Nika wrote in the chat and shift into an entirely different place, I guess. So you write about centralization and surveillance, and that is something that I'm very interested in. Like, this is much more where I feel at home in terms of topics. And going back to what I said previously about societies deciding what they want to do, I often think about, like, we're, as a society, not really thinking about what we ended up in over the last, say, 10 years in terms of technology. It's not that the information is not available, but it's very hard to really understand even what the status of our societies is, let alone what the trajectory of this is and what we're implicitly agreeing to. And even harder, I think, than like just realizing these things is, as humanity, deciding what is it that we actually want to do instead. I think this is such a hard problem to understand where we are and to talk amongst each other, where would we like to be instead. So I think it's not that we lack information, but I think we lack understanding, and I think we lack mechanisms for even like thinking about what do we want and how could we get there. This is something that's deeply distressing to me. It's entirely unclear to me what to do.
I mean, maybe comment on this point. I mean, obviously, some of these issues are distressing, like heightened surveillance and the ability to do violence and all of these types of things. I suppose I think I would, at least from what David Graeber looks at as a sort of looking at a sort of theories of value that he has, you know, I tended to think of him as making an argument for, you know, communities that were collective within themselves had a kind of a gift economy where they shared, and communities that had hierarchies and they valued, it was the exchange that proved, you know, that created the future, what kind of society you have. So it's not that it's so someone had, you know, by demanding hierarchically something from someone else, like I'm the feudal lord, I read in here, and I take my 3 bushels of wheat, that proves, that demonstrates the value that that person's more important than the other. But the underlying part of that is that it must be held together. If it doesn't hold together naturally, many people would like, maybe they're not so valuable. Then it's violence that is required to hold it together. And so instead of thinking of these technologies are, created by themselves and they're making a more difficult society, I think the technologies are created by people, and they're using, in some sense, violence at a subtle level to control the control of new technologies and new designs. But equally, you could tell a story about technology that is very positive and affirmative. Look, we have healthcare now that, saves people's lives. Look at the possibility for vaccine awareness. I mean, that's maybe a bit of an irony, because there's some arguments about about whether or not the vaccine was the original disease was part of a human experiment to protect us from diseases that went wrong. But the point, even on that research phase, is like if you have sort of less hierarchical systems of importance within research, you maybe get better technologies. So even technologies like surveillance can be used in different ways, in an anonymous way, to help and protect and surveil the mental health of a city without giving someone some particular power over everyone else to do that. So there's tremendous potential in all of these things, but they're grounded in an initial process where someone is using their control and their power to help design these. And the legacy is because when you have a material technology, it's like a social relationship, but it's made a bit more durable. As in you make a technology, like, okay, we'll design a balloon so that somebody can fly over in the air and see other people. So that relationship of someone's above other people will now be possible in a longer period, because they have that a technology is a social relationship made durable for a longer period of time. And so it takes much longer for those, the particular turnarounds in a technology. I'm trying to think of, like, one of the most obvious ones is, weapons of mass destruction are quite hard. That's a durable relationship in the sense that people who say, we're going to have to protect you and we need to have a military, somebody else could have it, so we're going to build these weapons of mass destruction, like bombs and missiles, and then other people, and then once they're harder to get rid of, because they help keep some people in power who can then demand more weapons of mass destruction. But again, pointing to earlier societies that David Graeber looks at, there's various points, like the whole of this book is the argument that Rousseau and all these people were debating about the plains, about the constitutionalism of the Native American people on the East Coast, these the various Iroquois alliances, and they were kind of arguing it wasn't just that the Native people were magically good, it's that those Native people had within the past couple of 100 years dealt with a society that had gone really, really badly and was very hierarchical, and they were all trying to not do that again. And they built a cultural tradition that was made more durable by the social relations they built, that lasted longer because of it was in that pattern for a long time. So I don't know if those are some thoughts that are helpful, because I always tend to get very bleak and despondent about technologies because they seem to give some people more power than other people. But I don't think that's inherent in the design of them, potentially. Or it is exactly that design of the technologies that could be done a different way, so that it's not inherent in the function of some of these marvelous things that we can do, that they must be designed in a way that also creates hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of, I think it was David Wengrow's first book, he looked at mass production in the antiquity. And there was an awareness that mass production provided economies of scale, which provided a great benefit to the society in question. But they also knew that that kind of standardization produced great social costs. And so there were safeguards imposed to prevent those kinds of relations from being institutionalized across long periods of time, which is why I think the element of creative refusal is so important here, that's ultimately what I think they're arguing is necessary to prevent these relations from becoming ossified, is that we have to creatively refuse to participate in certain features of it and find where those cracks are and carve out those autonomous zones. I think now is probably a good time to wrap up, unless someone wanted to chime in with another thought.
Hello?
Yes.
Am I there? So
Yes,
I'll turn my
hello,
video.
Max.
Hi there. Max. Yeah, I just had a few thoughts. I haven't quite finished the chapter, but what I really found interesting was, I don't know, it all sort of the abundant society and how all these people were able to be together due to their knowledge of being able to find food and support being together in this alternation. I really found, what was the agriculture argument that really changed the way sort of the colonizers could take advantage of ownership of the land. Yeah, it's just a very, I don't know, how we kind of so dependent on the system to just feed each other at the moment. And I find to break away from that, I don't know, being able to, I don't know, fuel a change somehow. It's a bit vague, but yeah, I really found the feeding, and without food, there's not much of any group of people can do for very long without the nutrition of, to create the change. Anyway, yeah, it's a bit, but yeah, enjoying it all, and I'm glad to be part of the group. But yeah, cool.
All right. Should we go over logistics for when to meet again for chapter 4? If we want to continue in order. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nika?
I would suggest every other week, but
Every
I
other
don't know
week?
how they will feel about that. Maybe it should be every week. I don't know. It's also the seminars in London School of Economics now every week, so it's kind of like a lot going on.
It is, yeah. I'm fine with every other week, or if we want to do it less frequently. I certainly don't think more frequently is necessary. Let's see, today is the 27th. I don't have my calendar. So I show that to be November 10th. Does that sound good for folks? Same time, and we'll do chapter 4. All right, great. I look forward to it. All right, it's been nice seeing all of you in this virtual reading group, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
next
Bye-bye.
time. Bye.